everyone's having a great week. So we're ready to go ahead and get started with our session today. And I just want to start off by complimenting everybody on the posts that have been up on the discussion and the conversations. I mean, I think even for me, I mean, I've done this session so many times and I always get new ideas, and this group is amazing. I mean, you guys really are elaborating a lot on your discussions, and you're also providing a lot of good feedback to one another. So I really want to compliment everybody on that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. As I said again, my name is Francisco Pinedo, and welcome. So since the last time that we met, we started doing a lot more with, just get my, we started thinking about your main lesson that you will be submitting by the end of week 4. Also, hopefully you've been able to implement some strategies identified in week 1 or week 2, like the grouping. I know it's really hard in a virtual environment. I mean, most of us are still working in that modality, but also I've given some examples in some of your discussions on how I do that in at least in my class. We've also watched the video on the multi-level ESL class, the activity, and again, a lot of great feedback when it came to that discussion that we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So in the video, and I think this was, for me, when I saw the video the first time, I mean, my reactions and my questions and my brought up in the discussion board were the same ones that I had, especially in the fact that where teacher brought her own, and this one where they brought in her own experience. So she tied the lesson to something that had happened to her. So for her, that had meaning. It had, it had a lot of content built in. And for students, unfortunately, some of our students also have gone through similar experiences, so they're able to relate. So here we're seeing how in our programs, we want to make sure that we are teaching something that is relevant to the students' lives. That is something that some of them might have the unfortunate situation of having gone through that. And for those of them who haven't, it'll be a learning experience. Also, the use of realia, the glasses, handcuffs, a fake gun. I know right now it might not be the best thing to do in the school setting, but hey, but now we have to think how we're going to do that virtually. So in my class, for example, I still kind of use realia where I show them things like, for example, like this the AirPod case. So I would show them things and or like a water bottle, things like that. So I try to make it as more visual as I can. At least they could see it on Zoom. Also the sentence strips, and believe it or not, I still use sentence strips a lot with my students, especially at the beginning level, and the role playing. So the role playing is something that I don't know. I think it was in this set. No, I don't. So in one of the sessions that I've done, people were saying how in their curriculum that they use, at the end of the chapter or the unit, it has activities for the students to do, and some of those are role playing. And I think that's a great thing to do with all your students, because it allows them to to verbally or act or something, be able to communicate via role play. So that one is also important. The assessments, we saw about the different types of language assessments from the instructional aids. And that was brought up a lot, because that was my question, like, well, this teacher is very fortunate to have an instructional aid. Most of us, I don't have that commodity, but it does help. What we have had in the past is students who are at the university level, usually like AmeriCorps or things like that, where they have outreach to us. And we have had a couple of students. So that might be something that you might want to look into, if maybe there's a teacher program nearby of a university or a teacher preparation program. They could come in and help, not quite the student teaching, but more of the assisting in the class. So, and last year we had about 2 of them who did that. We also talked about the paraprofessional. We saw about the paraprofessional And again, it's a great benefit. I remember the first year, the very first year I started in adult ed, we each had a paraprofessional for about 2 hours. And it was a great help because that person could focus with some students or could do help other students, or the different, it was mainly for the students. It was mainly the person was there for the student, not for me, kind of like you saw in the video. As I mentioned before, it can also be students who are in college and need of hours for their program. I also extended it to our local high school, especially for the seniors who need to complete their community hours. But this was prior to COVID. So, this was a great asset because seniors are usually a little bit more ready to work with adults versus, maybe a junior or a sophomore. So this was, and then they also got credit for it. They would get community service hours. So that's something to think about if in our programs we don't have the budget for a paraprofessional. It's the options that you could talk to your administrator as well. Some of the reading that we did in some of the things that we read in background reading B was talking about class unity, where in the whole class they were learning about the same topic, but on different levels. And I think that's the hardest thing, is when we're planning something, is like, how am I going to plan it from the basic literacy all the way to my advanced student? But in this example that you read, you read how the students felt connected. So for example, if I was to select a topic like on the American culture, and I know this is a very broad topic, it's not really narrowed down, but the thing I would do for the introduction is I would introduce the topic, like talk about the American culture. We would use Realia to introduce the topic to the whole class. Usually each class has a flag. And of course, I would label in English flag and then in Spanish. And then we started having a lot of Arabic speaking students. So my student who was more fluent in English, but her first language was Arabic, she actually wrote it for us in Arabic. And so we would have the flag, the actual flag in the classroom with, the labels, flag, bandera, and I don't know how to pronounce it in Arabic, but it was in Arabic. And then also for, we would talk about holidays that we celebrate here in the United States, and how some of them are different from other countries. Like Thanksgiving, it's something that's more celebrated here in the United States. Other things, for example, like Memorial Day. I mean, the other countries might have something similar, but we're introducing the topic, like, for example, Thanksgiving. What is a traditional Thanksgiving meal, and so forth. Also, we would talk about symbols, for example, the Statue of Liberty, the importance of it, the location, and then of course the White House. So in this activity, it was really nice because we could go ahead and start. Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat. You could go ahead and start introducing the students with different types of reality and then start asking them questions. So more than reality, I would just introduce pictures we up on our smartboard that we have in class. We would also do a short video to introduce a topic. So that's something that we would do also. We would introduce the topic, we would introduce the reality, and then we would display a short video that would talk about this. So sometimes there would be a video that's talking about the United States, and like a short couple-minute video. Usually these videos I would get from the USCIS website. They have a lot of like Welcome to America videos, things like that. So this is something I would show to the students because, again, we want to tie something to something else. So in this case, to citizenship, if the students were interested in going into citizenship prep. The presentation, we saw how the presentation was a new information to all levels. We read about the topic, we would do a closed reading activity. This is something that we would do more in the elementary level, but even for our beginning high, maybe even our intermediate students, we would do a lot of closed reading activity. And at first the student was kind of like, well, what is exactly is this? So a closed reading activity, for example, we would say the USA flag has 3 colors. And then in the second one, it would be the USA blank has 3 colors. So closed reading would be that the student will try to remember what word would fit in there. That's at least how we present it to our students. So they would kind of remember, they would say flag, and if it's something that in the vocabulary, it's like, for example, some of the, if it was a vocabulary word, the student would write it out, would sound it out, and so forth. So, and also use to reinforce with the video of what was read. So we always try to reinforce, I mean, last year, and I think the year before, we had students that were very visual, and it's very interesting because every year my class is so different. One year I remember I had a class that was very auditory. It's like I had to be speaking the whole time. Once I stopped speaking, they kind of like lost track of everything. Another year, they were very into reading, very reading heavily. So like if I wasn't reading off like my book or my lesson plan, it's like they weren't really participating. Well, this time the group was very, very visual. So they like seeing visual cues, and it's especially now teaching remotely. Again, it's something else. Students are very visual now. And even then, we still do some closed reading activities as a whole class, and then reinforce it with a video. Usually the video, I would send it to them prior to the class or a little bit after the class, just to reinforce. I always like reinforcing everything, especially now that I only meet with them twice a week. Grouping, and I think this is the part where it's the more of the actual what things that we could do in the class to just have everything flow better, is the grouping. So some of the things that we've read and maybe we saw in the videos is to make it as transparent as possible. Meaning, don't label. Students are very, very good at picking up patterns that we do. So if all of a sudden I start calling, the same people in the same group, they're going to start noticing, hey, we're all the Chinese speaking people, we're all the Spanish speaking people, or we're all the Arabic speaking people, or if we by level, sometimes students, teachers, I would see, they would group students by levels, like they're, and they would make it very clear. This is going to be the high group. This is going to be the intermediate group. This is going to be the beginning group. It's like, you don't want to label. And that's what I told one of my colleagues. It's like, we want to make it as transparent as possible. The students might pick up a little bit on it, but it's going to take some more time. And by the time they kind of pick up on it, it's like we've already changed them so many times. They don't even know like how we're grouping them. One of the things that we would use to group students was using their initial placement test. I know sometimes initial placement test is not the best, but if your agency does initial placement testing and does testing, every couple of weeks that you have to do, we would use the test results to group the students. So teacher would know what students were kind of like at what their number, their level, their NRS level was, and that's how she would kind of group. We would group the students. We of course we have that list, and then when we want to do the different type of grouping, we would use that list if we wanted to the crossability or likability grouping. We would also pair shy students with more social students. So sometimes it's like all the shy students kind of wanted to sit together and you really didn't get any conversation from them. But I noticed that when we started pairing the students with the shy ones with the more social ones, that would be very beneficial because it helps students break out of their shell. And then, as the time went on, these shy students were now the social ones. And oh boy, let me tell you, they really got social last year. I mean, they would very active, involved in different things in school site council, DLAC, ELAC, school safety committee. And, they began, and that's what we want to see. We want to see their involvement in the community. Also, teachers know their students best. So even if the initial placement test says the student is a beginning student, but you work with them and you know that they're an intermediate student, you know your students best. You would know how to group the students. So in the chat, I want you to write how you group your students. So maybe prior to this, learning about crossability, likability, how would you group students? I mean, I've always said, I come from the elementary. I always number up 1, 2, 3, and so forth, or A, B, C. But how would you um, group your students? So think about when we were in person, and I know a couple of you have started remotely, so that might be a little bit hard because if we do breakouts, they kind of like get assigned on their own. But how would you group students? So let me go ahead and look at the chat. Okay, so I'll give you about 2 minutes. Some people I would see do things like they would group students based on the color of something that they're wearing, or some of them would be by height. And again, it's not to say that those are bad ways, but let's see, I group my students by levels because I'm working in two. Oh, yeah, that would be yes, grouping two students because you're working in two books for each class. Yeah, I could definitely see how you want to have them. Although there is some curriculum that I've seen where it's different book, but the level in the, or the units are pretty much the same. So that was interesting. So by levels, sometimes by advanced, intermediate, beginning, other times it's random by counting off, other times it's just where they're seated. Yeah, and I could see this working mainly in our evening. Again, our day population and our evening population is day and night. My morning ones are more active. They're more like, yes, let's do group work. Whereas my evening students, again, they work, they go home and have a quick bite to eat, get ready, come to school. They're tired. So with them, sometimes they just literally turn to the people next to them and say, okay, this is our group. Let's see, when I want to level to integrate, I have popsicle sticks, with a picture in it, and they have to go find their mate, like peanut butter or with jelly and salt with pepper. Oh, that's a very nice way, Gloria. Caitlin says to group cross level abilities assigned with colors or work with. Okay, when I group students in my very small ESL class, I group students with like level abilities. Okay, very good. So yeah, I would do kind of the same. Many times for me, it would work, just like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and all the ones here, all the twos here. Or sometimes I would do something kind of like a jigsaw, using that model. As well, Caitlin says she only has 3 students. Yeah, it's hard when you have either a very small group or a very large group. And again, we don't know how groups are going to be able to work in the near future now. So the likability grouping is when teachers work with each level, rotates groups, and assigns tasks to each group to work together. So the likability, they're all either beginning, they're all intermediate, or they're all advanced, and the teacher kind of rotates around. Example, for a low beginning ESL group, you would say something like, draw a picture about a vocabulary word selected and then label the picture. So if it's a flower, they would draw the flower and then they would write flower, very basic. High beginning ESL, or even low intermediate, is you would find the definition of the word and use it in a simple sentence. So they would, use a dictionary, either if it's the book dictionary or if they're using the dictionary that we have in the iPads already pre-installed, they would use a dictionary and then they would use it in a simple sentence. So right there, you could see it's pretty much the same. They're using the same words. It's just one of them is doing more of the drawing, the beginning. The high beginning, low intermediate is doing a little bit more work. And the intermediate, high advanced, they're doing a closed reading activity using the vocabulary words and use the words in a paragraph about a topic. So kind of like what I introduced at the beginning where it had the sentence and then they had like they need to fill in the blank. They would do that type of activity. or use some of the vocabulary words to write a simple paragraph about the topic. So this is some things that I would do with the students. Of course, your beginning students are going to finish quick because they're doing just the drawing and just the simple labeling, whereas your intermediate advanced is doing more of the actual writing. So I would always have supplemental work. Doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and make more copies or find more things to do, but I would find things if you have the technology in your classroom. For example, afterwards, I would say, when you're finished, visit this website. You know, for that group, I would give them a specific website, and maybe for the intermediate, the low beginning, if they or the high beginning, I'm sorry. If they finished, I would say, okay, go on to your Google Drive and go ahead and transcribe everything into a Google Doc and share it with me or share it with the group. So that way it's something still related to what they originally did, but it's giving me more time for the advanced group that's doing a little bit more. So it doesn't mean I need to create or have supplemental lessons. It's just I'm beefing up the lessons for when they finish, because some of these students do finish fairly quickly. With the likability, we set time for groups, example, 20 minutes to do the task. So you would give, give the task and then the allotted amount of time. So, and then in each group, I would have different different roles. I would have like the time police or the timekeeper, and then you would choose the student who would be like the note taker, maybe the presenter. So everybody in the group has a task, and they're all again at the same level. And then choose what evaluation you will use, like for your beginning, your intermediate, and your advanced students. So it could be something as simple as explaining to the class, whereas something might be going up to the board and writing it out, or reading their paragraph that they did, to the whole class, or if they did it on the Google Drive, share it with on, on the display that you're using. For example, at the beginning level, some of the things that we do is we would ask the students, what did you draw? What's the name? So the teacher would be the one kind of asking, and they would be the students would be the ones responding. In a high ESL, I would be like, okay, what is the definition of? And many times I would say, okay, use the definition from the dictionary, but kind of put it in your own words. So that's what we were really looking at. More of an intermediate, what is the context of the word? Advanced, what is the main topic? What is the detail of your paragraph? Supporting evidence, things like that. So you could see that the same activity, I kind of branched it out into different activities within each group, but then at the end, it's still the same topic that we're doing. Okay, so let's go ahead in the chat box. Have you used likability grouping in the past? Okay, have you used likability grouping? And I think, I mean, coming from the elementary side, I think most of my colleagues in the elementary side still do a lot of the likability. It seems, that's how it was engraved in my mind, that it was easier because I could target each group specifically. But let's see what you have to say. Have you used likability grouping in the past? Okay, so we have rotations in my class. So I meet with both groups on center. Oh, well, that's nice, center days. I work group with students with likability, and then in a folder with different levels. Okay. I like that concept, center days. Okay, about another minute or so. We use the most my academic multi-level classroom. Yeah, and I think also that's how I would do it more. I would do more because I have taught multi-level, many years, and I think that's like Adam says, I was the same as what I used most with my students. I taught ABE 1, I had readers and non-readers, so I taught phonics, etc., and used one group while the other were to focus on more on comprehension. Yes. So now we're going to discuss about crossability. Okay, let me see, Miss Lisa. In my previous experience, the grouping was based on grade, class schedule, and the classes generated small, under 5. The older students usually had a higher level of language skills. I've used to help with the same way, subject math, but different levels. Yeah, yeah. And again, these grouping strategies, you could extend them beyond ESL. I mean, we just saw like an ABE, also in our ASC program, even our citizenship program, we would group students with these different crossability and likability. So with the crossability, students are grouped with all levels. So you have, each group has the different multi-levels. For example, group 1, and usually we would have about 3 to 4 students per group. So I would have the low beginning, the intermediate, and maybe the advanced. Then in this one, I would use my, I could either use the test scores from their test that the students have to take, that determines their NRS level. So I would use that to determine, so I would kind of like beforehand make like a grid and be like, okay, from this number to this number, the beginning students, the intermediate, the advanced. So I would use that list and kind of have it. And then again, I would know the students as well. And then that's how I would pre-assign. So usually the day before, I would make a chart and I would be like, okay, this student, this student. So I would kind of pick one from each group and make a little group. And then when they came to class and we were going to do a grouping activity, I would just write it on the board. So I would have everything on the board and just tell the students, okay, this is the group, the groups you're going to be working with today. So they kind of already knew the routine of it. So 3 to 4 people for group, 4 being ideal because you would really have the 4 different levels. So each student takes a part to achieve an end result. So we would always say, a team means everybody's working together. So if it's a group of 4, that's why I really like groups of 4, because I would say each of you is 25% of this group. So if you all work together, you're going to achieve 100%. If it's only one person, it's going to be 25%. So I made it very visual for them. So they kind of got it. And each student will do a part. So based on their skills, we would say, and I would say like, okay, you're gonna do this, and even within the group, sometimes they kind of knew who was ready to do what. So teachers work, it also teaches work readiness skills, the soft skills that the student needs. In the job, you're going to need to collaborate and work with other people, maybe break out of that shell, or get into that comfort zone of working with other people. So it's a soft skill that our students will use out in the real world or in their job as well. So for example, in each group, they had tasks. So we had the timekeeper. Usually the timekeeper is the easiest. So I would probably assign that to my very low beginning student. Either on their iPad, they would just set the stopwatch, the that time thing, and then for the other student, maybe for my beginning high, it will be the note taker. So they would kind of write down like the main concepts, and then my more intermediate high student would be my speaker, the one who's going to speak to who's going to maybe speak to the whole class. And then, well, that's the reporter. The reporter is like, I kind of combine sometimes, because sometimes I had groups of 3. So my intermediate could be the speaker, and then my advanced could be the one who reports to the whole class. The speaker would be the one who talks more within the group. So kind of is like, okay, like let's move on to this, or so you're saying this, and things like that. They're the ones who would delegate more within the group. The goal is for the students to learn from each other, to collaborate, and to support each other, where now my role, your role as a teacher, is going to be more to facilitate and assist each cross-ability group. So it's not that you're just working with this group at this level, but you're working with each group on the same task, and you're helping from your very low student to your high student. And then again, it's just more of being the facilitator, more the guide on the side, which we talked about in the first webinar. And then this one here is where you start seeing students after a while really start developing those communication skills. Even my low beginning student, I mean, they might not be able to write or maybe even read, but they're able to start communicate more with one another. So in the chat, let's go ahead and chat in if in the past have you used cross-ability grouping? And if so, maybe how was your experience? Okay, let's give it about a minute and a half. Okay, so I haven't used it. And again, this one, it's very hard to do virtually because in a virtual environment, I would have to pre-assign, we use Zoom in our district, so I would have to pre-assign the breakout group, kind of like what I did before, but now it's like, if they don't show up, I mean, if they don't show up in class, it's very easy. I could just go on the board and erase and add and change. But if I call it prefabricate, but it's pre-assigned. If I pre-assign my Zooms and the student's not there, it's very hard for me to manually move a student and have the student all of a sudden disappear from one group and appear in another one, and so forth. So given the, okay, so let me read the, okay. Given the size of class, cross-ability was only real option. Yeah, the students support each other. We split up into partners and work, okay, in Zoom, in breakout rooms in Zoom. Always the other listens and offers pronunciation help, yes. The higher student also benefits because they are essentially the pair, the teacher in the pair, yeah. And I think that when, very good point that was brought up is that when students start feeling that confidence that they could start helping other people, they really, that's when you could see them blossom a lot. I like the cross-ability grouping with conversation practice, so the more fluent speaker can help with the pronunciation. Yes, and many times that's what our students want. The student wants more of the pronunciation. So many times I have students who literally tell me like, please, if I say something incorrectly, please correct me. And I'm like, oh, well, tell your group as well. And so that's also really good to convey. Excellent. Okay. So the closing activities. So in the closing activities, again, in person, we would have group presentations. We would do group presentations maybe every other week when it wasn't too busy. Sometimes like right now that we're getting towards the end of the school year and we have so many things due and graduations coming up, and you know, in a typical year, we wouldn't do as many presentations because parents are involved, you know, with their kids' schools and this and that and the other things. So, but more towards the beginning, middle, maybe up into early spring, we would do a lot of group presentations. Role playing, we kind of had a little bit of success with role playing, mainly in our high school equivalency program in the history aspect. So it was amazing. I mean, the teacher, she really like, the students will do role playing of a history lesson. So where they would do a skit or they would The very last time we were in class before COVID, they were doing a role playing about World War II, and it was, I mean, it engaged. All the students were so engaged. Out of the class, the students out of class related activity, then the student reports back. So Soledad, where I live, it's a very small community, and we all kind of know each other, or are related to each other in some way or another. So I would go to the bank, and then it would say, like, oh, you know, your student was here and they practiced perfect English. They were able to do a transaction in English, because I know the branch manager there. So, and you know, we at one time done a field trip to the bank. So they would tell me, or during parent conference week, the teachers in my school would be like, you know, the parent of such and such, you know, they're in your class, they didn't need a translator this time because they said they wanted to practice their English. So you want them to practice their English. And like for me, it was easy because I found right away, I found out. Also, you can reinforce the vocabulary or grammar lesson. It reinforces, does a lot of reinforcement. So it's one thing reading about going out in the community or talking to your child's teacher, and another thing is actually doing and then hearing the feedback back from it. And then of course I would report it to the class. I wouldn't say who, but I'd be like, you know, I'm very happy that a teacher complimented one of you on the parent conference, and you know, I kind of went on and gave the examples of what the teacher said. And it's something that, you know, you're making the student feel validated of what they're doing and what they're learning, and then it's reinforcing what they read on in book. Some of the materials that we use for our, of course, in our programs, are commercial materials, mainly from publishers. I mean, we all have different publishers that we use. Well, now that kind of shifted a little bit, where more of it's online platforms that we use, either this learning management system or different apps that you use in your program. Some of us use teacher created material like the videos. Some of us still use, I know at one point I was recording my lessons, and then I was putting them in our Google Classroom. So the student was absent, you know, they could retrieve it. Some of us create our own material. I mean, especially for Spanish high set, some of the teacher mainly would create everything in the content based on the English high set book. Also from colleagues or other students, we had a lot of things also created by students. So some of the students would create a lot of things in the classroom. For example, posters, especially like for our high set class on World War I and World War II. They would create posters. We would laminate it. We would hang them up in the classroom, and so forth. Okay, so what type of materials do you use? So do you borrow from online, from colleague, seasoned books? So these are books that were published long time ago, but sometimes I still am referring back to them because they have that one thing that the new ones don't have. And sometimes I just update them, I transcribe and update them. But what do you use for materials? Okay, so I'll give you about a minute or two. You don't have to put the name of the book that you're using or anything. I mean, you're more than welcome, but you don't have to. Collection of books, okay? I use a lot of websites now, so I'm finding that I'm using a lot of websites, and that does take a little bit of more time because you have to make sure that the website is, that it provides good information. And then that's something where I would teach my students, like finding relevant sources. I'm not just gonna, push out something that come to find out later it's not a reliable source. And that's something that we've been working with. I brought a lot of images from the internet to provide a prompt. Okay. I also like ESL websites for worksheets, textbook, YouTube, Learning Chocolate. Yes, Learning Chocolate is great. And other websites. Going back to what Caitlin was saying, it was very interesting because last week, a week ago, my class is on Tuesday, we were having a discussion about that using clip art and how it went into copyright. So that's when we had, and it came up it was part of the unit that we were doing on talking about like how to use like programs like copyrighted images that you could use that are, you know, for free use. So we went into a little bit of that, but and always give credit to the source. Yes. Let's see, Zoom setting is limited. I add my own extension activities or find lessons online. Zoom setting can also include videos and image. They use Burlington English, old workbooks, PDFs, websites. So yes, we use also a lot of websites. We use apps, and you know, we have our main textbook that we use. This year we started using a learning management system, LMS, what they call, where we house everything in the student, kind of like a Google Classroom. And let's see, is that use multi-level student books and worksheets provided by my publisher. I also use grammar books, Google Images, and online material. Yes. Yeah, and I think, you know, now the students are kind of used to that. Let's see here. Try this. Okay. So in podcast 3, we're talking about the 7 stages of a lesson, which is called the WIPEA model, the warm-up, the review, the introduction, where you state the objectives. You also state the college and career readiness standards or the adult ed standards. The presentation, you make comprehensible to all levels. The guided practice, which would be the group work. Communicative, which would be the use of new skills in the group. The evaluation, where you're taking a snapshot of the content that you mastered. So there's different ways that we could do this. And the application, how are you going to do this in, how are you going to use this in the outside world, in the outside of the classroom world? So when we're talking about the 7 levels of creating a lesson, that's what we, oops, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. It's the WIPEA model. And I know when I was introduced to this model, I'm like, wait a minute, it kind of sounds like already what I've been doing kind of, but now it actually has a name. And the evaluation piece, for me, evaluation meant a quiz right away. I mean, again, coming from elementary. So for me, every time I would see evaluation was a quiz, a test, a quiz, a test, or quiz, a test. But then I started finding out that no, we could do so much more, like we talked about earlier, role play. It could be a presentation, it could be a collage. There's so many things that we could use for evaluation. And again, if we're using a publisher published from a publisher, they usually have their own, which we could, you know, of course use, but sometimes I like to make it more hands-on. In podcast 4, we're group work. We are place the students in likability grouping for content. We would do the crossability, which is the jigsaw strategy, and the students become an expert in their content and share with others. So they would train in others. So I would tell the student, like, you're going to become the trainer, you're going to become the expert on this, and you're going to go teach it to the other groups. So we would do likability first and then crossability. So for fluent, we would crossability works best, and also have a timekeeper to stay on task. So if we have a task of 20 minutes, this person will kind of give like, okay, we're halfway there, 5 minutes left, and let's start wrapping it up. So I would always introduce vocabulary and show examples to my students. Well, what does a timekeeper do? They're not just sitting there with a clock, with a timer. They're actually, using verbal cues or saying, we're a couple minutes left, or let's start finishing, wrapping it up, and so forth. In podcast 5, group work number 2, so it's jobs in a group based on language skill and level. We would challenge the higher students become with more practice, problem-solving skills, and having timekeeper help. So in these different podcasts, also they're giving, again, more examples of different strategies. And I'm going to go back to the WIPEA model, because this one here is really going to play out more when you start developing your lesson in week 4. So when we talked about going back to the W in WIPEA, it's the warm-up. So this is where you tap into the prior knowledge. So you're using a published a book from a publisher, you would notice that the introduction, maybe the first lesson is going to be that they're tapping in to the students' prior knowledge. Then you would do the introduction where you provide an overview of the content, the objectives, um, the standards. I always like including the classes. We use a lot, we use the CCRS, the College and Career Readiness Standards. We also would do the adult ed standards. Then we would do the presentation where you're teaching the lesson and the content to the whole class. Then the practice, and this is when the students would do the group work, the likability or possibility grouping, however you decide to group them. The evaluation is where I assess what they learn. Again, by default, sometimes we would do a quiz or a test. I mean, again, it's up to each teacher. I'm not telling you you have to do this or that. But for me, I think it's more of show me what you learned and show me how you're going to apply it in the real world. So it could be role play, it could be different scenarios that could be played out. At one point, the students used their iPad to do a small video of no more than a minute, and then we would see it. They would airplay it, and we would see their video, and that was the evaluation. So I would kind of, for the evaluation in that video, I would identify like, this is what I'm looking for. And then we would all evaluate each other. And, of course, the students are never going to put down one another and say, oh, you didn't do this, you did. I do. I said, okay, you were missing this. But of course, I would tell them a little bit later. I wouldn't tell them, on the spot. So again, different types of evaluation. And then the application. How are you going to use this outside of the classroom? Going back to the example of my student going to the bank and doing the whole transaction in English. So and then the branch manager, telling me that a couple days after I went. So that's where I see the application. Of course, we're not all going to have that opportunity. I mean, especially if you live in larger cities, but at least the student is able to apply it and use it outside of the classroom. And that's what I always encourage. I always encourage them, like, practice what you know. Practice what you know at home, in your community, at your job, in school, if you volunteer, in the DLAC meetings, ELAC meetings, all the different district level meetings that a lot of my students are involved. That's where I tell them to practice these skills. So the lesson plan, just make sure I'm here. Okay. So the lesson plan template that you will be using to create a lesson will have that the warm-up, introduction, presentation, and the practice. Notice that in the practice you have for the beginning, intermediate, and the advanced. So for the beginning students, what is it that they're going to do? For the intermediate, what is it that they're going to do? And for the advanced, and I do have an example that I'll show you on the next slide. Notice at the top, I have the objective for the whole class. And then I have the objective for my beginner students, my objective for my intermediate students, and my objective for my advanced students. For me, I'm only going to project the class objective. What is it that I want the whole class to know? But in my lesson, I'm going to state what each level is it that I want them to be able to achieve. So that one, I'll kind of have it more just for me. So I know this is a really busy screen, and with my laptop, I really can't see the top part, so I'll just read it from here. So I have the warm-up. So my warm-up, so this is a video lesson plan. So my warm-up is instructor to use a TPR, the total physical response activity, to review personal characteristics. And then the presentation, the instructor told a story about a robbery in a bank, in a parking lot, using visuals. Instructor asked questions about the story, use sentence strips to summarize facts. This is going back to the video that we saw earlier this week, and how to make the facts needed for a police report. The instructor gave additional presentation to the beginning group by modeling a dialogue and making an emergency phone call where she'll be like, ring, ring, and then they would pick up. Then here in the practice, we could see that in the practice, we have the 3 different levels of ESL. We have the beginning, the advanced, intermediate, and the beginning. It's kind of backwards on this one. So sorry about that. I didn't realize it was like that. But then you could see The advanced, for example, students in groups of 3 create a role play about robbery events and crime. Likability, students formulate questions about a picture sequence for crossability activity. The crossability group, advanced students ask questions and intermediate students respond to questions about the picture sequence of a robbery. So this would be an example of what you will develop in your lesson plan. So again, this is taken from the video that we saw earlier about the teacher talking about her horrible experience with a robbery. And then you could see that for the beginning, the students work with dialogue and substitute personal information. The students answer yes, no questions, the who, what, when questions to identify something. The 2 students practice basic questions with peer tutoring. So you can see that at the beginning level, it would be more of the yes, no, like was the person a man? Yes or no. Did they have glasses? Yes or no. So it's more basic, whereas with the advanced, they're the ones formulating the questions that most likely law enforcement will want to inquire about. The evaluation piece, again, for my advanced, the students present a role play. My intermediates, the students complete a writing activity. And for my beginning, it's again, they're just mainly students are evaluating either like in the video with the aid, or it could be with the help of maybe the teacher, or in when we did a similar activity, my my colleague in the class, she was the other teacher who would help me evaluate. The application asks the students, how are you going to use this in real life? So the instructor asks the students to find a picture of a person, describe it to a friend, bring it to school the next day, follow up. So, you know, kind of like describe a person. And again, there's different ways that you could do. Sometimes the students, the last time we did a similar activity, the students say, oh, I went on Facebook and they saw, you know, the news article of someone that was either wanted or they had been captured. And then they described it to us, like the person this, and they were caught here, and, you know, things like that. So there's different ways that the student could use the application for. Whoops. So I'll leave this for just about another minute if you want to take a look at it. And I see a question. Is it all likability practice with beginning? You know, that's what I was noticing. Monica pointed that out. Is it all a likability? I didn't do this one. So I mean, I don't know, maybe that's a good one. Let me, you know, I need to really look at this slide because I kind of felt the same way. That's why I was kind of hesitant when I was reading it, is that it seems that it is more of a likability practice with the beginning and less of a crossability. So I'll look into it. But again, this is just something that you could use to model when you do your lesson. Of course, you could do lessons that you've already done in class, different with different activities that you've done. I mean, it's by no means that you have to plan this and deliver it to your class in the next week or so, but just something that you have for you. I mean, eventually, ultimately, what we did when my staff, we took this one, this training, is we started developing lessons, and then we would share them between each other, and then we started sharing with other people in the consortium. So it's definitely something that you want to develop and maybe have and share. Why not? Okay. Okay. We are now at the end of our session. So if there's any questions, we have a couple of minutes, and I'll leave this one up. If you have any questions, you want to go ahead and put them in the chat box. My email, I think everybody has my email, but if not, I'll just put it here in the chat. If you have any questions with your lesson that you'll do, and again, it's due at the end of week 4. Okay. So I don't see any questions, Vicky.
Francisco, I'm looking
Uh-huh.
at your email address. It looks like
Oh,
there's a typo there.
yeah, I like my laptop, but I like using an actual keyboard better. Let's see, k12.ca.us. There we go. Oh, I ate the S.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. And again, I'm very excited and happy when I go in and I see all the wonderful discussions and feedback and support that you provide one another. And that's ultimately what I say. It's not that you're going to learn from me, but you're going to learn from each other. And I also learn from you. So please, continue to keep up the great work. Again, I'm always here to support you. And if you could I kindly ask if you could take a moment of your time to complete the evaluation for this presentation. Vicky has posted it in the chat. So once we're done, you could go ahead and do that, please. And I will continue to read you all online. Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much, Francisco. That was
You're
wonderful.
very welcome.
And thank you everyone for joining us again this afternoon. Again, the survey link is in the chat. If you would be so kind to complete that, we would certainly appreciate it. And just a reminder that the recording will be posted in the webinar 2 makeup assignment in Moodle by tomorrow afternoon. So with that, enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your week, and we will see you online. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.